Welcome everybody to this next session of our lecture, the second one organized by the politics group at the Institute for East European Studies. And we continue the tradition we established already with our first speaker of not inviting political scientists to talk in the sessions we are responsible for. And we again have invited an economist, which is a great demonstration of how fluid the boundary between economics and political science today is if you talk about quantitative methods. We are very happy to welcome Nikita Zakharov as our presenter for today. Nikita is a postdoc in Freiburg and has an absolutely exciting research agenda which covers many aspects of, let's say, authoritarian rule and governance in Russia, but also not only in Russia. And in his empirical work, he focused very much on, I would put it like this, doing the best out of very diverse data and very complex historical and political precedents occurring in Russia. So I know very well his really fantastic experimental paper on the impact of opposition TV channels on electoral behavior. And he has numerous very, very interesting projects. We do collaborate with him on another project on the political determinants of misreporting the COVID-19 data in Russia. But today he's going to talk about the authoritarian propaganda in Russia. And we are really looking forward, Nikita, to your presentation. So thank you very much for joining us, although on WebEx.
Thank you, Alexander. That's a fantastic introduction. Thanks a lot. Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. And I'm happy to present this research. This is a work in progress. We are progressing with this project for quite a while, but that's exactly the point where before, putting that online as a working paper, here I would be very welcoming towards your comments and criticism, of course. And of course, if you just don't understand anything, because I'm from economic side of the social sciences, we do interrupt people during the presentation. I'm totally fine with this. I hope that doesn't contradict any norms at this seminar, but I would rather be very happy once you really pinpoint the thing that that you want to clarify. So please don't hesitate doing this.
Except then you will end up in the recording. You have to think about that.
Yes. Then you'll be exposed in the recording. Honestly, I just don't mind. I just feel that it's a much more organic conversation and the presentation itself. So back to the topic here. Can authoritarian propaganda compete with the position on social media? This is quite a question, I think, especially because, social media is pretty much everywhere. It's like 2 out of 3 people in the world already have that social media account. This is crazy. But interestingly, this question wasn't really asked properly in the social sciences. So that's what we are embarking on together with my co-authors, Michael Rochlitz and Kunz Horst from Ghent and Bremen universities. And just briefly, sorry, okay. So if anyone will be leaving during the process, I would like to get just a few takeaways for you right now. So what this paper is about is a field experiment. And that was done in 2018 when the Putin was going for his re-election. So what we try in this experiment is we try to have 2 informational treatments. So we try, to promote 2 media campaigns. One against the government, one is rather pro-governmental. And the pro-governmental one we call also propaganda interchangeably. So as a result, we're trying to see if it had, if each campaign had an effect on the voting. This is quite important. A lot of papers don't really look at the electoral outcomes. Sometimes they look at the attitudes. Sometimes they estimate something like, around this thing. But it's by the end of the day, it's important actually whether the person have voted for the incumbent or not. And this is pretty much the actual preference, the revealed one. So what we find is that despite all the common beliefs that propaganda is so powerful, and that was part of the home reading that I wanted to you to go through, because I think that was a really interesting piece about the propaganda, really upbeat about its power and persuasiveness and how it controls the minds. What we find, however, is that propaganda has quite a limited effect. It does not really engage the users on the social media. It does, though, affect pretty much in line with the previous evidence that the people using traditional news media, like analog television, federal TV, cable TV, and newspapers, they do react to the propaganda, but not the ones who have been receiving their news from online one. So, on contrary, anti-regime propaganda produced by Navalny has a very strong negative effect on voting in both groups. So across all the respondents, we find that they tend to vote for Putin less. So that would be the takeaway for now. It's quite a summary. The paper is looking more in the direction of becoming a shorter paper because it's kind of to the point. But I'm sure we will spend quite a bit of time on the setting. And I'm really happy to introduce it to you. I just hope that you will be all on the same wave with me. So just a bit of the theory. How do we come to ask this question? And this particular the thing that motivated quite a lot of my research. Honestly, it's quite of the typical introduction of my presentations for quite a while, is that I'm quite curious. It is crazy that this democratic backsliding, 90s was the democratic wave and so many countries have democratized. What we have in the 21st century is that there is actually more and more countries becoming less and less democratic. This is, so to say, was already named the third autocratization wave. And this is pretty much just an illustration. I'm not going to talk much about the figure here, but it's what they call democracy gap. It's that there are just more changes towards autocracy rather than democracy in the whole world. And for example, the pandemic was not helping. It was really reinforcing all these tendencies towards autocracy. But if you think about it, we're not living really in a world where old school dictatorships are ruling. That's not like Nazi Germany or Soviet Union. Those very repressive, very violent dictatorships, I would say, they are not there really. They're just a few things like North Korea, but the current state where all the political, so to say, democratic backsliding is migrating towards is the informational autocrats. And that's the paper by Guriev and Friesman, and they had a series of other papers. And this year they actually announced the book based on this theory. I'm quite excited to order it quite soon. So what they say is that the regimes are no longer terrorizing the population. They really try to make citizens, sometimes rationally, but often quite incorrectly, to believe that the autocrat is competent and public spirited. So they try to just create the right balance of the information feed towards the population that would really just justify that the occupation of power by the autocrat. And those regimes are quite popular. So Guriev and Driesman, for example, are really talking about Ecuador, Hungary, Peru, Russia in particular, as they say it's one of the typical and pretty much exemplary informational autocracies there. And of course, Turkey and Venezuela. So this is the state of the world we're having for a while now. And this is exactly the motivation. Okay, well, here we are, where the information is the thing that really rules the world. So, and now identifying things is that we know the propaganda does work. So it has been established in the previous works that it's very persuasive. Quite few studies have been dedicated to looking at the voting outcomes. But, quite often there's just not so many elections. Nevertheless, propaganda was consistently found to have some sort of persuasive effect there. And what is curious is that it has not been studied for the social media, and this is back to the to this concern, is that honestly, the social media is a huge trend in the 21st century. It's been, increasing everywhere, the penetration of the social media. And this is the huge thing that pretty much coincides with this third wave of autocratization there. So it's really reasonable to ask yourself questions. Okay, well, does the social media, wouldn't that be rather, autocracy reinforcing factor, or would it be actually pro-democratic one? So this combination of those two trends is something that I find extremely interesting, because that's the world we're living in, and it's really not clear what conclusions to draw there, where the ethics go. So of course there's this theory that media is a pro-democratic. Why? Because it's a decentralized source of information. It can counter the propaganda, which is normally organized. Propaganda is, in the sense, is something that information controlled by the government, and social media is something that's not controlled by the government so far, let's say, in most of the countries. It could be in the future, but that's a different case scenario. So for now, papers really predict, at least theoretically, that it will be rather pro-democratic. And there's some empirics there which consistently show that internet undermines political power. In semi-authoritarian regimes, it decreases votes for the ruling party in South Africa, especially where the corruption is high. Paper by Nikita Zakharov and so on, for example, find that even one blogger, the Navalny guy from Russia, was very successful at increasing accountability at the state-owned companies. And this is amazing, because you could think, well, there is no way a typical Russian person could have, changed anything about the state-governed companies. And apparently, blogger with a very good, let's say, feeling of the internet people, and with a good talent of doing the investigations, his investigation can really drive a change. And of course, there's a very recent paper about the expansion of mobile networks, and they show that they really have a negative impact, causal negative impact, on the support for authoritarian regimes in the world. So internet seems to be pro-democratic, right? So this is what makes our starting point, where we see those two trends going together. Sorry, was there a question? No. So those two trends kind of seems to be even more paradoxical at this stage. Yet, of course, you can argue. So there's quite interesting two books there which say that, well, there's more to the social media. It should be seen not like a silver bullet against the autocracy or autocratic tendencies. It could be as well a tool, and dictators sooner or later they will learn this tool. They could use social media, to find the social media activists, right, and punish them. They can use the bots, and they can also use some other disinformation things. So I think the debate is pretty big there, and it's really important to start really digging in this direction. So once we have this paradox, we're just trying to uncover one particular question, and that's why I would think that what we're doing here is a rather small question, because it's quite focused towards one particular thing. Does the propaganda succeed on social media? And of course, there's a satellite question to this. Complementary question is, well, look, social media is actually a place where the opposition was there since it was banished from the normal media. In many countries, like information autocrats, they really tend to be happy only when the opposition can report to very marginalized group of online users. The thing is, of course, that those marginalized users are, in many countries, are about 50% of the population getting news from online. So that could be that they won't be any satisfied there, because the opposition is gaining power then. But are they successful on social media? There's basically also very, very little evidence about this. So that's why our title is whether the propaganda able to compete with the opposition or not. So we just want to distinguish those two things, which very nowadays like a very basically two main heroes of the social media in terms of the political field. So, and what we want to do it is, of course, as especially as economists, I'm sure you've already saw quite a few of us that we are very concerned about, identification strategy and how pretty much how to have the design in place. So we would like to have basically the identification strategy is an experiment as just basically the best option for identifying effects there. We will do this. We did it in one country setting. Of course, that's highly desirable because that means that there's same adequate, same culture, same law, same political environment there. So it does pay to do the experiments, not across countries. And for this, we choose Russia. And those particular things about Russia which make everything possible for looking at the persuasive power of propaganda on social media. Is that because Russia is an information autocracy, as I mentioned before, quite a standard and quite a leading one as well. There is control over traditional media. So think about it, that the Russian media, like federal TV stations or newspapers, they're pretty loyal because they pretty much belong to the politicians and, well, to the state-owned companies as well. And yet there is this internet thing that was for quite a while, it was not regulated that much. It was not even pretty much okay to write a lot of, I would say, heresy in terms of the regime loyalty and offend Putin and so on, especially like probably drawing the border around our experiment timeline. And active opposition was really making the best of the internet. They couldn't really survive otherwise. That's basically the only playing field that they could access in this particular regime. So, and what is most interesting is that just as many informational autocracies, you still have elections, regular elections, where votes are somehow often counted, and they sometimes could make this quite a strange cases where the population actually manages to get to the to the voting bin and probably vote against the autocrat or against his candidate. So that more or less is not a completely irrelevant mechanism in those regimes. So in here, in this setting, it just basically we use the elections to reveal the preferences of the Russian population regarding our treatments. So but if you have any questions, I could also call for a little break for any feedback. Like, are you, with me on this? If not, I will just continue. Okay, so I don't see any raised hands. Oh, yeah, super. I guess that's not the comment. Thanks. So what do we have here? Is that was the year of 2018 when Putin was going for re-election. In Russia, it's not such a big question really if Putin is going to get re-elected or not. This is quite a fact somehow. So because it's autocratic elections are not there to select the most capable candidate. It's really about signaling. It's really about signaling to the population and to different opposition groups, as well as the opposition groups within the government, that you are still loved by people, by the public, and you're legitimate, basically. So it's not surprise this is a function of autocratic election. And you do win them because you have this huge machinery like electoral fraud that can supply electoral fraud for you. And of course, everyone thinks that everyone voted for Putin because there's a propaganda 24 hours on TV, which is very, especially during the electoral period, it's very, very positive about everything. And they mentioned Putin's name regarding everything there. So they really, let's say, working their rubble. Yet there was something different in 2018. And there was this little thing that was bothering, I bet it was bothering a lot of people in the regime, is that popularity among the online media users was quite low. And the thing is that they were also blaming the online environment, the internet, because for quite a few protests that appeared in the spring of, sorry, that's a mistake, 2017. That's when Navalny has started his electoral campaign. And he started this campaign with publishing, basically uploading, but it's actually publishing the full-scale 80-minute video on YouTube about the Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev, once a president in Russia, of course, a close associate of Putin. And the movie was about his offshores and about his wealth and all this ridiculous real estate that he possesses, which he would never afford according to his official income, of course. So clearly, this insinuation of corruption of the, let's say, the third Russian president and currently prime minister were steering quite a lot of protests, you know. So essentially, that was a very strong move on the side of Navalny to start his electoral campaign. He was really going to become the opposition candidate for the presidency. So, and that was, of course, everything was online, because not a single federal TV channel would have would dare to show even the news about the video. I mean, they didn't even dare to show the news about the protests, really. So, in a sense, that was not something that was something that you could prevent through the normal TV, but online that was. I mean, online population was pretty much out of control, and they were sharing this news and commenting on this. So in a sense, as the regime would be thinking, is that, well, there was something wrong with how we target the population with propaganda, because yes, the people we know with the TV at home, watching TV at home, they are really well targeted with this, but the online people, they don't really get much of stuff. Okay, we have all these trolls, you can imagine this online troll machinery, but they didn't really have anything like a special message to them or so. And as I argue, of course, we do not have any proof or statement from the official side of the Russian government, but that was pretty much the trigger to start this the propaganda campaign that I'm going to talk about just in one step further. First, I just want to say to line up the information about the anti-regime campaign, because that came first. So in March of 2017, Navalny launches his campaign with this movie, and it gets posted online, gets roughly 7 million views in the first week, just 1 week. So it's extremely successful YouTube video, and it does mobilize the protest. And they're protesting then on this. The biggest one occurred on March 26th with a bit of follow-ups, not only in Moscow, a bit outside of it, but generally in the federal cities, so Moscow and St. Petersburg. So that builds quite a popular movement around Navalny and gives him recognition, of course, and it somehow doesn't make it so ridiculous that he wants to be a president, because suddenly he is the head of the protest. The protest has his name. So this is the title, this is the caption of the movie that you would see on YouTube. And it's pretty much all discussed. So if you don't know Russian, it just mentions the word corruption, all his real estate there. So palaces, vineyards, and a hidden empire of Dmitry Medvedev. And this is quite interesting, because a lot of people were thinking, well, he's kind of like a, one substitute person, but honestly, this guy also got quite rich on just by being, one of the figures in the regime. Maybe not the main ones, but nevertheless, it brought him a lot of income, I would say, and that does steer something in the population. Because I mean, if he got rich like this for not doing, so to say, any prominent job in the government, that was one of the surveys of Levada. So essentially, that's some kind of not fair. And the regime has to respond to this. At least they decide to respond to this. That was pretty my interpretation here, of course. So what happens, of course, is that Navalny is barred from running for president. Yeah, clearly that was still a bit of the, not clear discussion there. Some people really hope that he can try, because he was allowed to run for the mayor of Moscow. But then we know that for the mayor of Moscow, when he ran there, he got 27% of votes, and that was not a pleasant surprise for Russian elite. So that pretty much was the reason why I don't think they would ever let him run for any other office if they can. And I mean, you see that's clearly correct prediction. I mean, today's it's very obvious. So yet there was something that the government could do to engage the YouTube people, where the Navalny was posting his videos, and that was quite a surprise. It was actually something like a natural experiment there. So 12 days before the election, they not the particular day, but there was actually one responsible person for this, Vladimir Solovyov, the main propaganda person. Like he was pretty much claimed on the internet like the main propagandist. So what he does is that he uploads the movie Miropорядок 2018, the world order, and it was hailing the success of Putin on the international arena at home. And he does it as well on Facebook just a few hours afterwards. And of course, there's some kind of discussion. Is it legal? Because it's clearly advertising Putin, and this is one of the reasons why they don't put it on the TV. So the whole thing stays pretty much until the elections and during election period, just on the social media. So it's quite curious case, because this was, I would say that would be a very expensive piece of propaganda that they did not let to go to the television, even when that was the time really. The time for propaganda is before election, and they leave it online. And this all points towards the idea that, well, they really wanted this YouTube crowd, and all the social media guys really kind of watch it, especially because it was some kind of half legal, and they did do their best to advertise it actually during the prime time on all the federal TV channels, but not showing the movie itself. So this was quite peculiar. That doesn't really happen much in autocratic regime, that they really, I would say, really try to cater for online crowd by producing something very expensive. I mean, they spent quite a lot of $1 million on this, even if it's really just the interview with Putin there. Nevertheless, this guy posts on his own page, and it got a lot of views, pretty much. That's how it looks like. It got a lot of views, by the way, allegedly because of the bot, hired bots, but I cannot prove it, of course. So that's just one of the thoughts there, if it did get real attention from the public or not. Nevertheless, what we have is that we have one movie that steered a lot of protests from the opposition side as the anti-regime one, and then we have this intention to catch the eye of the online users, and that's a propaganda movie designed. It's really designed, because if it wasn't designed for online ones, it doesn't make sense really to keep it online for almost a month just to affect no one. So clearly that was something that was designed to affect people on social media. That's why we are talking about who is more successful. So how do we find out which movie is the best to encourage voting for Putin or against him? So that is an experiment that we do right away. So in a sense, that was quite an improvised experiment, because we had very little time. That's what I have to really emphasize here. That was kind of improvisation, where we just sat a few days after this release of the movie and thinking, okay, this is actually the movie which will and can affect the people online. It's designed to do so. But is it better than, for example, the one that came 1 year before by Navalny? So the best way to do so is actually really to try to promote both of those movies to Russian population and see what they do in the very few days. Elections are coming, and then we can ask them again. So what we do is that we contact Levada, and those wonderful people really help us to organize a survey in a very limited time. So basically 3 days before election, the telephone survey starts, and we have those 3 groups. That's pretty much in the random selected cities, just outside of Moscow. Just keep in mind, the main idea is to get outside of Moscow, because people there are just more politically affected, but Russia is not really Moscow. That's also a lot of people outside of it. So we wanted to have something more representative. So capitals of some regions. So just to save time, I'm going to skip any discussion on this. And what we want also to see if they really kind of get the news online or if they're just traditional users. Because, we know that both videos were pretty much available for the social media users. So if you don't really watch YouTube, how would you watch both of those things? Of course, you can go there, but normally you wouldn't really know unless we really send you the link and so on. So this is geography of those 6 cities. So we tried just to capture the European part of Russia for quite a few reasons. Of course, it's just most people in Russia live there, so it's just reasonable. And we picked just very typical cities, so not too rich, not too poor, because we're drawing the random population. In the end, it doesn't really matter, but that's just for information. So here is the pro-regime treatment that we give to people. So once again, we have these 3 groups. The people who will get the treatment, the nudge question, that's embedded in the interview, in the first wave of interview before the election. And we just ask them, okay, did you see this movie about Russian President Vladimir Putin released by Solovyov? It's a very recognizable name for quite a few people. And then we emphasize that it has been viewed quite a lot. So it's, in a sense, we try to promote that it's a kind of viral. And then we summarize the main idea there so that they get the idea what this movie is about. And it's about defending Russian interests at the world arena, and about the success of Russian politics. And if you watch this, so a lot of people heard of it, 60% to be precise, and 13, so 1 in 6 of the respondents watched it. That's basically not so many, and there's pretty much a big window there, really big potential to influence those people with this type of question. And anti-regime treatment was pretty much, a symmetric one, is that we again explain the movie, who made it, and we emphasize that it was popular and that we ask if they watched it. And it's very close to what we find about the pro-propaganda movie, is that 1 in 6 people watched it, and a lot of those heard of it. So once again, those 2 different groups, they don't intersect. So we don't have anyone who gets both treatments. So far, in this isolated manner, we just want to see which one affects the minds of people better. And of course, there's the control group who gets no such question about about both movies. So we just assume that it would be the same proportion of people watched and not watched. So that's basically our timeline. So we have these 3 groups. The first survey is March 14th to 16th. Elections are on March 18th. So we do it really quickly. We really hope for kind of a quick, so to say, response, and that people don't forget things. And then we ask them again after the election with the second wave. And quite a lot of people, so 2 out of 3 respondents respond again in the second one, and I can show the balance tests for attrition one. So in a sense, it's quite balanced, and it's not because we were offering this type of the questions. Actually, just one little point here is that both questions were also supplemented with a SMS that we sent after the survey to participants, respectively, that contained again this little information about the movie and the link to it, so that the person, majority of Russians have smartphones, so that they can reach it right away. Not only think about it by the end of the day, but they also have some, let's say, some kind of quasi-material nudge there. So, and what we are looking at is the primary outcomes, is the voting for the Putin and turnout. So that would be pretty much the main point. Whether they're successful or not is determined by do people vote or not. This is like the best revealed preference there. And voting was just basically 3 days apart from the first survey. So that's where we expect the effect. So there's also some attitudes outcomes that I would discuss in the end if we have time. But that's not necessarily the main focus of this paper. And I explain later why. So So before and after treatment, we also ask about intentions to vote. And this is good because this is what guarantees that we have the difference in difference approach. I'm sorry, how much time do I still have, Alexander?
I'd say some 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay, perfect. So that's a difference in difference because we know who they, so we asked them if they were, whom they were planning to vote for and if they're coming to election. So for both of the questions, we have their intentions. And what we're interested in is not only how they voted in the second wave after the elections when we asked them, but also how that differs from what they stated before. So this is quite important. That brings us to the different diff approach. And we also have those two groups that two subsamples that we're looking at separately is the ones who get the news online or not. We have one dedicated question for this, where you get, when we ask where do you get the news from, and we have the list of options like TV, radio, social media, or internet outside of social media, and whether if there's any option that touches the online sphere, then they're in the first group, and if it's exclusively offline analog media where they get the news, even if they go to the internet, but if the news come from something not online, then they're in second group. And of course, different individual characteristics such as educations, occupation, age, and so on. And voting for United Russia. It's kind of important. So, and it's very direct. So what we're using is that intention to treat. This is a typical design for informational treatments quite often because you just cannot really say in the end of the day if they watched or not. Even if you ask them afterwards, there's a bit of the bias whether they would be answering positively or negatively. But if, so to say, all things taken into account and average, they should vote more or less, and that would identify the ethic. So here we have the probability of voting, which is binary variable if they voted for Putin not in the election. And then we have, of course, those two treatments, which do not coincide, as I was saying. So those dummies for treatment, if they got or if they didn't get this nudge and this SMS with the code, with a web link. And of course, this intention to vote and intention to vote for Putin particularly. And then sometimes then we add controls, but I will also show you some results without them. So this is very, very straightforward. I hope you don't have any additional questions, but please ask me if there is something. So either you voted or you didn't. Did you get the treatment or you didn't get the treatment? And as the controls, we have these intentions, just summarizing it again. So looking at those three different settings, so for the average effect in the population in the sample, and those subsamples differently, because again, the subsample, so as I'm saying in option 2, is the one that both campaigns were targeting. The opposition campaign, of course, didn't have much choice to target the typical offline users, and the propaganda campaign basically did it by choice. They decided not to provide their movie on TV. So they chose the social media for this particular reason. So of course, what would have happened if they did show on TV? This is quite a question that allows our design allows us to address as well. So that's what we see in the third, let's say, in the third option. So I would not spend too much time. I would just say that economists pay a lot of attention to this. And I have a really nice table for successful randomization, and there's no bias and attrition towards the treatment. So it's not because we show them this nudges about the treatments and the movies. They're not, responding in the second wave because of that. They have some different concerns, but it's not because of our treatment. It's not. We are not driving any particular group away from the second wave. So essentially, now I do not really need much time now because we're on a final line. So here comes the results. And once again, this is just a dummy variable, whether you voted for Putin or if you said something else. So there were different other options. And when we look at it, so the red coefficients, so the red dot is the pro-regime campaign. So that's a propaganda one. and the blue one is a opposition campaign. So what we see is that it's amazing that the pro-regime campaign manages to get not so far from the zero effect. So clearly that's not statistically significant, and we could say that the whole intention, to affect the Russian population with this particular treatment did not really succeed. Yet Navalny movie, and I wasn't really much surprised, but he really manages to to encourage population not to vote for Putin. So Putin does lose roughly 9 to 7% of vote in our full sample because of them getting this treatment, and because it was randomized, we say it's causal. So what happens once we split the sample for those two groups? So just for your attention, those are not completely similar. So offline users were not the smallest group of offline users, 212 people, and online somehow we have the bigger one. But just because offline one is more exclusive. So the online users still don't get any positive. In fact, they get the negative coefficient on the pro-regime campaign, meaning that while it's still not statistically significant, there was not even, let's say, not even some kind of direction toward the effect. It could have probably backfired among some of the subpopulation there, but on average, we would say it's a nil effect there, while the Navalny campaign is particularly significant effect there, where we see again this 9% decline in the likelihood of voting for Putin. Yet, when we look at the offline ones, it's that's a traditional audience for the propaganda. That's the people who really know, what the whole thing is about. If you show them the movie about how great Putin is on the world arena, they really consume it, and they just make the correct, so to say, reaction to this. So they are just inclined to vote for Putin more consistently. And there we find this 12 to 13%, depending on the controls, effect that the people will vote with a higher probability for Putin. Yet Navalny treatment, so if we imagine that the palace for Putin's friend Medvedev was broadcasted on TV, it would actually have quite an effect there. So that, of course, explains why the Novgorod doesn't allow opposition to go on the typical media, because opposition is persuasive, even for the typical audience of the Novgorod. So this is our main results there, is that the so-called powerful propaganda machine of the Russian regime is not that powerful after all. It has one particular limitation. It cannot really reach people who are not, consuming the typical ones. And of course, here we can have a whole discussion why, because there's some literature which says, well, that online people are, of course, they select themselves into online environment because they don't like the propaganda, and clearly then this negative coefficient is kind of just predictable there. And of course, the online ones are more informed. That's what we find, for example, in the other papers, that they just use way more of the media sources, and they are just more informed about the politics, really. So that's why they don't get, everything for granted if they see it on TV. But what is quite surprising, and literature didn't really look at that many opposition campaigns, is that so if you think about it, even if a very uncompetitive regime, the one which is also getting more and more repressive, Navalny treatment was quite successful. So we don't find anything significant really on the turnout there. So that's quite typical, though, for a lot of papers which look at the campaigns, because it's not about the mobilization. It's really about basically nudging people, to change their opinion. So in a sense, that's in line with the previous literature, mostly on US. So I wouldn't comment much on these results. So main summary for today's lecture is that we find no effect for the full sample. The pro-regime treatment is highly ineffective in the subgroup of online users, yet their main audience is there, so the effect is there. They react predictably, and consistently. So they do have quite nice, sizable effect there. Anti-regime treatment, however, is consistently successful among both populations, and the magnitudes actually, amazingly, they really fit into all this range of quite a few other studies, but one in particular for the pre-Putin Russia. If you remember, there was this independent TV channel, NTV, and then it was demolished as the very first attack on the media freedom in Russia by Putin and his political surrounding. So this NTV was pretty much also declining his support for him on this margin. So, and both treatments don't affect turnout, as I was saying. This, for example, the quite recent paper by Sites really shows that political campaigns are really about changing the mind, but not really mobilizing the people. So this would be the core results. Alexander, how many seconds I have still?
1 minute.
1 minute, okay. So, okay, maybe I'll just round it up. So I found I was digging a bit for some kind of quote to start a paper, and I somehow like it sometimes. And I didn't expect that Vladimir Putin once actually did say something about the social media, very kind of informative. It's pretty much what his plan was, apparently. So what he said is that if the authorities do not like what is happening on the internet, there is only one way of resisting. On the same internet platform, you have to propose different answers and collect a large amount of supporters. That's funny because that was the quote. Actually, it was a quote from Vladimir Putin 10 years ago for now, but that's exactly his plan for 2018 to counter something that he really didn't like on the internet. This activity of Navalny and his supporters and all the protests, he really didn't like it. And then he really went for his plan, and he went for this internet platform with the hands, of course, of his propagandist guy, Solovyov. And well, he proposed different answers, yet the people online didn't really buy it. That's the thing. So it somehow really failed. So I'm just surprised that I really found something like in the past, which gives you the glance to the future and also to some type of the failure there. If you have any questions, I'm also happy to discuss why it was happening. So there are some results, for example, on the attitudes about the perception of the position in Russian world politics. But that's about the attitudes, and I'm not really trusting the results on attitudes because we asked them 2 weeks after the election, so there was some lag there, and pretty much the treatment ethics could also fade away. So nevertheless, what we, for example, here find is that that's exactly offline crowd who saw the increase of the importance of the Russian role in the international arena. Interestingly, so maybe that's why they went and voted for Putin, because they also learned something from this propaganda. The rest of the population didn't really respond in any particular direction. Okay, so thank you a lot for attention. That was a really nice opportunity to present this, and I hope we have a nice discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nikita, for a really interesting presentation, which I think raises a lot of points for discussion, which we are going to enter right away. So I'm going to, first of all, stop the recording.